I have been asked more than once why I stayed in my seat. The cadets who left that day are not ashamed of leaving. I want that understood before I say anything else. Half of my cohort walked out of the Terran module before it was finished, and not one of them was a coward. Several of them had already bled for the Concordat by the time they reached Coldreach. One had lost a brood sibling in the Karsh withdrawal and had come to the college precisely to learn how such losses were kept small. They were not weak. They were, if anything, the ones who understood soonest what they were being shown. I stayed because I did not understand it soon enough. That is the honest answer, and I have stopped dressing it up. I am Ian Marr of the Voth, and in the year I am describing I was a first-year cadet at Coldreach, which is not a place on any world but a wheel of gray metal turning slowly around a dead sun. The Concordat keeps for exactly that reason, because nothing lives there, and nothing can be hurt by what we practice. We are a careful people, the species of the Concordat. That is the first thing you must hold in your mind, or nothing after it will land. We are careful the way water is careful, finding the low path, the cheap path, the path that spends the least. Our whole art of war is an art of not fighting more than the arithmetic requires. You should know how we are taught, before I tell you what we were shown. In my first season at Coldreach, I learned the doctrine of sufficient force, which is the spine of every Concordat officer. It is a beautiful thing, and I still believe it mostly. It says, a war is a transaction. Both sides are trying to buy an outcome, and the currency is blood and metal and time. A good commander is a good accountant. He knows the price of the thing he wants, and the moment the price rises above the value, he stops. He withdraws, he sues, he accepts terms. There is no shame in it. The shame is in paying more than a thing is worth, in spending your people past the point where the ledger closes in your favor. Among the Voth we have a saying that a wise soldier carries a scale in place of a heart, and we mean it as praise. Under that doctrine, the Concordat has kept the peace mostly across a great many worlds for a great many turns. Wars still happen, but they are short, and they end where the numbers say they should end, and both sides walk away with something, because both sides could read the same ledger and neither would pay past cents. We were proud of that. I was proud of it. When I arrived at Coldreach, I believed I had come to learn the finest and most humane way of making war that thinking beings had ever devised, and I was not entirely wrong. Then, in the deep of my first year, they gave us the Terran module. You heard of it before you took it. Everyone did. It sat on the syllabus like a locked door at the end of a corridor you walked past every day. Older cadets would not tell you much. They would look at you a certain way when it came up, a look I did not understand then and understand completely now, and they would say only that you should sleep well the night before, and that you should not be ashamed of anything you felt in the room, and that half of you would not finish it. We thought they were being dramatic. Cadets are dramatic. We assumed the module was some grueling tactical marathon, some sleepless problem set that broke people through exhaustion. It was not that. It was a room and a screen and footage. The proctor of the Terran module was an old Sethric named Vas Dole, and I want to describe him because he matters to everything that came after. The Sethric are a long-lived people, and Dole was old even for them. His hide had gone the pale gray of river stone, and he moved the way old strong things move, without waste. He had fought in 3 campaigns before he ever taught, and he had the Concordat's second highest decoration, which is given only to officers who bring their people home from something that should have killed all of them. He did not raise his voice, ever, in the whole module. He did not need to. He had the stillness of someone who had already seen the worst thing he was going to show you and had made his peace with carrying it. There were 40 of us the morning it began. I remember the number because Dole said it. He stood at the front of the room, which was dark and tiered like a surgery theater, and he waited until we were quiet, and then he said, "There are 40 of you. When we are done, there will not be 40. I tell you this so that when your seatmate rises and leaves, you will not think it is a failure of theirs or a failure of yours for staying. Both are answers. Both are correct." We did not believe him. Of course we did not. He told us what the module was. Every officer of the Concordat, he said, is taught the doctrine of sufficient force, and every officer comes to believe, somewhere behind their eyes, that they have understood war. The Terran module existed, he said, to show us the one place in the known galaxy where the doctrine had met something it could not price. He said it plainly, the way you would state a fact about the weather. There was, he said, a species whose way of war broke the arithmetic. Not because they were more advanced than us. They had not been, for most of the footage we would see. Not because they were stronger of body, though some of them were. They broke the arithmetic, he said, because they would not stop when the ledger closed. They kept paying. They paid past sense, past sufficiency, past the point where every doctrine we had ever written said a rational being lays down its arms. And then they kept paying after that. And after that, until the thing they were buying with all that blood was no longer an outcome at all, but something we did not have a word for. You have been taught, Dole said, that a soldier carries a scale in place of a heart. These people carried a heart. You are going to watch what a heart costs. Some of you will decide the cost is too high and you will leave, and you will be right. Some of you will decide you can hold it and you will stay, and you will be right too. But none of you will walk out of this room believing you understood war before you walked in. Begin. And the screen woke, and we watched the humans. The first reel was old. You could tell it was old because it was flat and gray, and it juddered, recorded on some primitive medium and copied forward across who knew how many centuries. It showed a field in winter on their homeworld. There was a line of them dug into the frozen ground on one side, and a line dug in on the other, and between them a strip of churned earth perhaps 200 paces wide, and on that strip there was nothing living at all. Just wire and craters filled with gray water, and shapes in the mud that the mind refused at first to read as bodies. I want you to understand what we saw and did not at first believe. We watched them go over the top. That was the phrase in the archival notation, and the translation glyph beside it explained it, and none of us needed the explanation after we had seen it once. A whistle sounded, a small, thin human sound, and along the whole length of that frozen line, thousands of them climbed up out of the safety of the ground they had dug, out of the only cover on that field, and they walked into the open, into the wire, into the strip where nothing lived, and the other line opened fire. We are not squeamish, the cadets of Coldreach. We had all seen death, most of us in some form, but we had never seen this because no species in the Concordat does this. There is no doctrine in the galaxy that puts unarmored infantry upright and walking into massed fire across open ground. It is not brave. It is arithmetic so bad it is not even arithmetic. And we watched the first line of them fall, not scatter, not break, fall, cut down in the first dozen paces. And we waited for the ones behind to see it and stop, because any thinking creature would stop. They did not stop. The second rank walked into the same fire, and the third. I heard someone in the row below me make a sound, low in the throat, the sound our people make when something is deeply wrong. Rank after rank of them walked upright into the guns, and they kept walking, and the notation at the corner of the screen counted the seconds, and I remember thinking with a kind of vertigo that the counter was wrong, that it must be running slow, because surely this could not go on as long as it was going on. It went on for an hour of their time, for one strip of that frozen ground, 200 paces wide. When Dole paused the reel, the room was silent in a way I had not known a room could be. He let the silence sit. Then he said, "The commander who ordered that attack believed it would break the enemy line. It did not. The ground you are looking at changed hands 6 times over 4 of their years. By the end, more of them had died for that field than there are living cadets on this station in 100 generations." He paused. "I want you to notice what you are feeling, and I want you to name it correctly. It is not disgust. You think it is disgust. It is not. Watch the next reel." 2 cadets left during the second reel. I remember their names, but I will not give them, because they asked me not to, years later when we found each other again. They were both good soldiers. They rose quietly in the dark, and they went to the door, and Dole did not so much as turn his head, and no one blamed them, and I envied them a little even then, because they had understood something I had not, and their understanding had been merciful enough to let them leave. The second reel was newer, and worse because it was in color and because it was close. It showed a city, a human city under siege in some later century than the frozen field. You could see the change in their machines. The way war had grown teeth it had not had before. The city was surrounded. The notation gave the numbers, and they were the kind of numbers our doctrine has a clean answer for. The besieging force outnumbered the defenders many times over, held the high ground, held the supply, held the sky. Every scale we owned said the same thing. Surrender. There is no dishonor in it. The city cannot be held. The price of holding it is everyone inside. The value of holding it cannot exceed everyone inside because nothing can. Therefore the ledger closes. Therefore you open the gates and you save your people and you accept terms and you live. That is the humane answer. That is the answer we are taught to be proud of. They did not open the gates. We watched them fight for that city street by street, house by house, room by room, through a winter that starved them, and we watched them do arithmetic that no Concordat officer would sign his name to, and we watched them keep signing it. We watched an old human. The footage was clear enough that we could see the age in his face, carrying a weapon nearly as long as he was, take up a position in the shell of a building, and hold a stairwell alone so that a handful of younger ones could pull back to the next street. We watched him do it knowing because his face knew that he was not going to leave that stairwell, and he did not, and it bought them a street, one street. I heard all around me in the dark, the small sounds of my cohort coming apart. Not weeping, we do not weep, the Voth, we have no water in us to spare, but the deeper thing, the sound of an assumption breaking. Because every one of us had been taught and had believed that a life is the most valuable thing in any transaction, that it is the gold standard against which everything is measured, that no ground and no flag and no city can be worth more than the people who would die holding it. And here were these creatures spending their lives like it was not the gold standard at all, like there was something behind the gold, like the life was the currency and not the thing being bought. 3 more left during the city. Dole paused it on the old human in the stairwell, froze him there, forever holding that step, and he turned to us and he said the thing I have carried since. He said, "You are asking the wrong question. You keep asking why. Why did they not surrender? Why did they not count the cost? They counted it. That is what you are not letting yourself see. They were not stupid and they were not mad. They counted the cost more exactly than you or I ever will, because they were the ones paying it. And every one of them in that city knew to the gram what the ground would take. And they paid it anyway. The question is not why they did not stop. The question is what they were buying that was worth more to them than the arithmetic. And you already know the answer. You have simply been trained your whole lives not to say it." No one said it. He let us not say it. He started the next reel. I will not describe all of them. There were 9 reels in the Terran module, and I remember every one, and if I set them all down here in full, I do not think I could finish, and neither could you. But I will tell you the shape of the thing, because the shape is the point. The reels escalated, but not in the way you would expect. They did not simply grow bloodier. They grew truer. Each one stripped away a way we had of comforting ourselves about the ones before it. After the frozen field, we told ourselves, those were primitives, they did not know better, their commanders were butchers. It was a failure of doctrine, not a feature of the species. And then the 4th reel showed us their doctrine, showed us the humans who wrote the manuals, the cold, clear ones who understood arithmetic as well as any Concordat officer better, and it showed us those same clear-eyed humans making the same choice. Not out of ignorance, out of decision. A human general in a war much later was offered honorable terms that would have saved a very great number of his people, and the footage showed him receive the offer and read it and understand it completely and refuse it in a single word, and the notation gave us the number of his people who died because of that one word, and it was a number that made the room go still again. He was not a butcher. He was not mad. He wept later in the footage alone when he thought no one could see. The archives had caught it anyway, and he wept for every one of them, and he would have made the same choice again, and we could see that he would, and that was the horror. Not that he did not care, that he cared completely and chose anyway. So we could not tell ourselves it was ignorance. We tried the next comfort. It was hatred then, some animal blood fury that overrode their reason. And the fifth reel took that from us too, because it showed us the ends of their wars. It showed us humans having fought like that, having paid like that, standing in the ruins across from the ones who had killed their broods and burned their cities, and it showed us what they did with them. They did not exterminate them. Time and again, in reel after reel, having proven they would pay any price at all to win, having shown they had the will to unmake an enemy entirely, they stopped. They fed the ones who had starved them. They rebuilt the cities they had broken. They stood their enemies back up and made them neighbors. A species that would spend 100,000 lives for a single frozen field would then, having won, kneel down and lift up the very hand that had held the gun against it. And I understood, watching it, that this was the most alien thing of all, more alien than the walking into fire, because it meant the fighting had never been about hatred at all. The hatred, if it was even there, was not the engine. Something else was the engine, something we did not have. That was when I began to be afraid. Not the way you are afraid of an enemy. The way you are afraid standing at the edge of something very deep and realizing you have been walking beside it your whole life without knowing how far down it went. 4 more cadets left during the 5th and 6th reels. We were fewer than 30 now, in a room built for 40, and the empty seats were their own kind of testimony, and Dole never once acknowledged them, and I have come to think that was a mercy too, that he let each departure be private, unmarked, so that no one had to choose between staying and being seen to need to leave. The 6th reel was the one that took my closest friend. Her name was Cyril, and she was Voth like me, and we had come up together from the same creche school, and she was better than I was at everything the college taught, faster with the doctrine, cleaner with the arithmetic, the kind of cadet the instructors watched. If you had asked me before the Terran module which of us would still be in that room at the end, I would have said Cyril without pausing, and I would have been wrong, and I have thought a great deal since about why. The 6th reel was not a battle. That was what undid her, I think. We had steeled ourselves for battles. The 6th reel was after a battle. It showed a human, an ordinary one, a soldier of no rank the notation could find, walking across a field where his war had ended, his side had won. The reel made that clear, and it showed him stop and kneel and begin to dig, with his hands. And the footage stayed with him unhurried, the way Dole's whole module was unhurried, and we watched this one ordinary human dig graves, one after another, for the enemy dead. Not his own, the enemy's. He dug them because, the notation explained, in his people's custom the dead were owed a place in the ground, all of them, and no one had come for these, and so he did it himself. Though they had been trying to kill him a week before, though no one had ordered him to, though no one would ever know. He dug until his hands bled, you could see it, and then he kept digging, and the reel let us watch the whole of it, every grave in the fatting light of that alien afternoon. And Cyril stood up, and I looked at her and her face. I had never seen her face do what it was doing, and she said to me, very quietly, so quietly I do not think anyone else heard, "I cannot be near this, Ian. I cannot spend my life near a thing that does this." And she went to the door and she left, and she did not come back, and she left the college within the month, and she is a good administrator now on a peaceful world, and we are still close, and she has never once regretted it, and I have never once thought less of her. I have thought, though, about what she saw that I did not, because she was right. That is the thing I did not understand until years later. She was not weak. She was clear. She looked at that human digging graves for the people who had tried to kill him, and she understood, before I did, exactly what the module was teaching, and she understood that she did not want to become a person who could hold it, and that was not cowardice, that was the most honest reckoning in the room. She counted the cost of understanding and she declined to pay it, She was the best of us. That is why she left first. I stayed because I still thought I was watching a lesson about humans. I did not yet understand that I was watching a lesson about myself. By the seventh reel there were perhaps 20 of us. The room felt enormous. Dole's voice in the dark had grown, if anything, gentler. The seventh reel showed us the worst hour of the human record, and I will not describe it out of respect, because some things should be known but not staged, and Dole himself told us so before he showed it. He said, "What you are about to see, I show because you must know it is real and that they know it is real. They did this to themselves and to each other. I do not show it to condemn them. Every people has such an hour in them. I show it because of what comes after, and you cannot understand what comes after unless you have seen how far down they went." And he showed us how far down they went, and it was very far, farther than our species has ever gone, because we are careful and they were not. And the same heart that made them dig graves for their enemies made them capable of the real I will not describe, because it is the same heart. And that is the truth about them that no doctrine wanted, that the well of it goes down in both directions, and you cannot have the one without the depth of the other. And then he showed us what came after, and that was the eighth reel, and it emptied the room. The eighth reel began in ruin. It began at the very bottom of them, in the ash of the worst hour, in a time when the notation was careful, and Dole repeated it aloud so no one could mishear. A great many of the wise creatures of their own homeworld had written them off, judged them finished, concluded that a species that would do to itself what the seventh reel had shown could not be trusted to keep hold of its own future, and had likely reached its end. The Concordat's own first surveys of Earth, Dole told us, had reached this conclusion, filed it, recommended distance. A dying people, the surveys said, brilliant and doomed, best observed from far away and not disturbed as they finished the work of destroying themselves. And the eighth reel showed us what they did instead. They did not finish destroying themselves. They looked at the bottom they had reached, the very floor of what a thinking being can do to another, and this is the part I have never been able to say without stopping. They climbed. Not quickly, not cleanly, not without falling back again and again into the old blood, but they climbed. The reel spanned centuries in that climb, and it showed us the same species that had walked into the frozen guns and dug the enemy's graves and reached the worst hour, and it showed them building slowly out of the ash, the thing that we in the Concordat had always assumed could only be built by careful people like us, a piece. But it was not our piece. Our piece is the piece of the scale, the piece of arithmetic, the piece of two accountants who both declined to overpay. Their piece was something else. Their piece was built by people who had proven they would pay anything, who had gone all the way down and looked at the bottom and decided, with full knowledge of what they were capable of, to choose the other thing instead. Our piece is the piece of creatures who never learned how much a life could cost. Theirs was the piece of creatures who knew exactly, to the gram, and chose it anyway. And that is what emptied the room, not the frozen field, not the city, not even the hour I will not describe. It was the eighth reel, the climb, the piece built by the people who had seen the bottom, because that was the reel that made it impossible finally to keep the humans at a safe distance in our minds. As long as they were only terrible, we could file them the way the first surveys had, as a danger, a monstrosity, a thing to be studied and avoided. The eighth reel took that away. It showed us that the same heart that made them terrible was the heart that made them climb, and that the climb was, if anything, more terrible than the terror, because it meant they were not monsters at all. They were us, with the scale taken out and something enormous and unbearable put in its place, and they had done with that heart both the worst thing we had ever seen and the best, and we could no longer pretend the two were separate species. They were one people. And that meant the choice they made, over and over, to pay past sense. That was not a flaw in them. It was the whole of them. And every cadet in that room who still had a scale where their heart should be understood in the eighth reel, that they were being asked to stand beside these creatures, or against them, for the rest of their lives, and that they would never ever be able to hold the same arithmetic and mean it, because the humans had thrown the arithmetic away, and one more than arithmetic had ever won. They rose then, the ones who left last, not in fear of the humans as an enemy, in something deeper and more honest. They rose because they had been shown what soldiering actually costs, not the medal, not the ground, but the heart, the willingness to be the old man on the stairwell, the willingness to dig the enemy's graves, the willingness to go down to the bottom and choose the climb. And they had looked at that cost squarely and decided they could not, or would not, or should not carry it. And they were right. I have said it before and I will keep saying it. They were right. There is no honest way to stand beside what that footage showed and keep a scale where your heart is, and the ones who knew they could not give up the scale were the ones brave enough to leave. When the 8th reel ended, there were 19 of us. Dole had said there would not be 40 at the end, and there were 19, and he counted us. I watched him count us, his old eyes moving along the tears, and something moved across his face that was not satisfaction and was not sorrow. It was recognition. He had done this many times. He knew the number would fall by half, more or less, every year, and he knew which half fell and why. And I think he loved the ones who left as much as the ones who stayed, because he had made the same reckoning once himself, long ago, and he had stayed, and it had cost him whatever it costs, and he had never once told us it was the better choice. There was a 9th reel. He did not show it to everyone. He told us this. The 9th reel was only shown to the ones who remained, and he told us we could still leave, that leaving now was still an answer and still correct, and no one moved because by then the 19 of us who were left were the 19 who had already decided, somewhere in the dark, that we needed to know the whole of it, whatever it cost, and that need, I understand now, was itself the sign. It was the human thing already growing in us. The refusal to stop before we had the whole truth, even when the whole truth would cost us the scale. Dole saw it in us. That is why he counts, I think, not to see who is strong, to see in whom the heart has already started quietly to grow. The 9th reel was short. It was recent. It was, in fact, from within Dole's own lifetime and mine, from the Concordat itself, from a border world I had heard of, in a war I had been taught about in my first season as a clean example of sufficient force applied correctly. I had been taught that a Concordat withdrawal from that world had been a model of good arithmetic. The position was untenable, the ledger closed. The commander withdrew, the civilians were evacuated in good order, losses were kept small, doctrine was honored. It was in our textbooks as a success. The 9th reel showed the part that was not in the textbooks. It showed that the evacuation had not been clean. It showed that a gap had opened at the end between the last of the fleeing civilians and the closing enemy line. A gap that the Concordat withdrawal, correct by every scale, had left open, because to hold it would have cost more than the arithmetic allowed. And so by doctrine it was left open, and the civilians in it were, by the ledger, already lost. Acceptable loss. Correctly accounted. Everyone who wrote the textbook agreed. And it showed that a human unit, a small one, a handful, attached to the Concordat force as observers, with no orders that required anything of them and every reason under our doctrine to withdraw with the rest, had looked at that open gap in that column of frightened civilians who were not even their own species, and had done the human thing. They had gone into the gap. They had held it open with their bodies, past sense, past sufficiency, past every scale, so that the column could cross. And the column crossed, all of it, and the human unit did not come out. Dole let it play to the end, to the last of them, and then he stopped the reel, and the room was full of the empty seats of the ones who had left, and the 19 of us who remained, and the old Sethric Proctor stood in the light of the stopped screen and told us the last thing, the thing the whole module had been built to arrive at. You have been taught, he said, that a soldier carries a scale in place of a heart. You have believed it, because it is the finest doctrine ever devised for the making of humane and limited war, and it has kept more of our people alive than any other idea in the history of thinking beings, and you should honor it all your lives. But there are gaps in every ledger. There are places the arithmetic leaves open because it must, because the scale is honest and the scale says the price is too high and the scale is right. And in those gaps the people you have been watching go and stand. Not because they cannot do the arithmetic, because they can, and they choose the other thing anyway. Every people in the Concordat can build a wall. Only one, so far, will stand in the gap the wall leaves open. That is why we keep them close. Not because they are the strongest, they were not, for most of what you saw, and it did not matter. Not because they are the deadliest, they are, but that is the least of it. We keep them close because they remember what a life costs more exactly than any of us, and they spend it anyway. In the one direction our arithmetic can never spend it, toward the gap, toward the enemy's grave, toward the column of strangers who are not even their own. They are the ones who will hold the door. And the reason half of you have gone, he said, and here his voice did not soften but went, if anything, quieter and more terrible. The reason the door of this room has opened and closed 21 times this morning is that half of you understood correctly that to stand beside such people, you must become able to stand in the gap yourself. And that is the most expensive thing a thinking being can learn to do, and it is not shameful to decide the price is too high. The ones who left will make fine officers. They will keep their people alive with the scale, and that is a good and honorable life, and I am glad of them. But you 19. He looked at us along the tiers one by one, and I felt his old eyes reach me and pass on. You stayed, not because you are braver, because the heart has already begun in you and you could not leave until you knew the whole of it, and that need is the first symptom. So I will tell you what you have signed. You have not signed to command from a scale. You have signed to be the ones who go into the gap. You will spend your lives learning to do the most expensive thing there is, from the one people in the galaxy who never learned to do anything else. And some of you will die in a gap that the arithmetic said to leave open, and no textbook will record why you were there, and it will be, by every scale we own, a waste. It will not be a waste. That is the last thing the humans have to teach, and it is the only thing they cannot prove, and it is true. Go now. You have a great deal to learn, and you have chosen the hardest teachers who ever lived. I have been a Concordat officer for a long time since that morning. I have stood in gaps. I have left some of my people in them, and I have gone into others myself and come out only by chance that I did not deserve. I command from a heart now and not a scale, and it has cost me exactly what Dole said it would cost, and I have never once wished I had risen and left with Cyril, though I love her, and though on the hardest nights I understand her choice better than my own. People still ask me why I stayed in my seat. They expect a story about courage. I have stopped giving them one because it was not courage. It was that I did not understand soon enough what I was being shown, and by the time I understood, the human thing had already started in me, that need to know the whole of it, to not stop before the truth was complete, whatever it cost, and once that has started in you, you cannot leave the room. That is all bravery ever was, I have come to think. Not the absence of the scale. The presence of something heavier than the scale, that you did not ask for and cannot put down, that makes you stand in the gap the arithmetic left open, and hold the door so that the column of strangers can cross. Half of my cohort walked out of the Terran module that day. They were right to go. The rest of us learned to dig the enemy's graves.